Hello and welcome to episode 8 of the RiptideLab podcast. We are rejoined by Dom Harvey, and we are taking a second and hopefully final look at Modern Horizons 2 as a review episode. And Dom, we got some feedback in the form of Reddit comments.
Oh no.
Not a lot of them, but they're directed towards you mostly.
Oh
One
god.
person said, "Every episode with Dom is an absolute gem. The two of you make for the best cube discourse around. What a set, too." And the second comment was a bit shorter. It just said, "Stan Dom."
Oh, love to see it. See, this is the thing. Reddit is a hive of scum and villainy and a toxic place that drags down the magic discourse, except when they're praising me, at which point they are, calm and wise and enlightened and really should be considered with more authority. So love to see that. But yeah, since the part one of this, we've had the rest of the spoiler drops. So there's always this weird pacing to preview season where I remember with the first Modern Horizons, you think back to that and you think, okay, Hogak, Astrolabe, all the stuff that really pushed the envelope way too far.
Mm.
And depending on when those get released during spoiler season, that I think that can really warp people's perceptions of the set. So it's funny if you go to Reddit and look over the comment thread when Hogak was spoiled, there's half of it basically is, oh, this is a weird and wacky card. That's kind of a cool design. And then the other half is, well, this is a lot of work. I don't think this is actually good in the existing dredge deck or whatever. And little did we know what was about to hit modern at that point. But I wonder how that is different if that is the first card that they show as an example of what to expect in the set versus something that just gets dropped with a dozen other cards on the final day of preview season. And so I try to keep that in mind during any spoiler season. It's difficult though when I write a weekly column about Magic, and so I have to kind of be time sensitive to what's getting spoiled and working to a deadline and so on. And so I can write about a card and think that I'm giving a fairly exhaustive treatment, and then by the time I've filed that article, the next day some new card drops down the pipe and completely changes the entire context. So but like I said before, I always have a few cube ideas on the back burner, just kind of whirring away passively in my head. And I just had
Mm-hmm.
to manually shut all of those down until the full spoiler was dropped, because I know there's going to be something hidden in there that's going to make me reevaluate everything. So we have that all now and we can get down to business. So let's do it.
Yeah. So I was listening to Lucky Paper Radio, which is a brilliant other podcast. I don't want to say rival
Yeah.
podcast because I am quite a fan of everything they're doing there. And they helped me kind of set up the distribution for our podcast. And we are now on Apple Podcasts. But Anthony Maddox, one of the people from Lucky Paper, said that he needs to add our podcast to his chores queue. Now, I feel like he could have been
Ooh.
a bit more diplomatic with his wording there.
I don't know if that is intentional ambiguity. Are we the chore? Are we the release from the chores? Are we what helps him get through the day as he's getting the mop out or whatever? I don't know. But hopefully this episode will be to his liking at least.
Well, it could be that he's trying to do some field research because I am, if all goes as plans, recording with him on Sunday. And so maybe he doesn't want to go in blind to our podcast environment. One of the topics that they covered in their podcast was the idea that a pushed one drop is more palatable to run than a pushed, say, 3 or 4 drop. And it was framed in such a way that I never really thought about before. Like, if I look back, I'm not sure that there have ever been any one drop creatures that I've deemed too strong for my cube environment. But there's certainly a number further up the curve that I've taken out.
Yeah, I think when you look at the mana system and how that tends to work and how that intersects with just modern approaches to design, certainly during that era in 2019, 2020, when cards were super, super pushed, there is still a cap on how good any given one drop can be. And if you look at, let's say, Legacy and Vintage, or some of these cubes, like the Function cubes, that really push this approach to the extreme, where the absolute priority is keeping the curve down, maximizing the branches, excuse me, the branches on the decision tree on any given turn, then even in there, like, I don't know what a one drop would have to look like in order to be too powerful. And some of the one drops that have been most warping in older formats, so like Delver of Secrets, for example, even then, they require this hyper-specific context where, yeah, if you have your Brainstorm, Ponder, Preordain, you can make sure you have over half of your deck is instants or sorceries. At that point, yeah, you get this fully juiced up one drop. But even then, like let's say Delver was just a 3/2 flyer for blue, and it didn't really care where you put it. I don't think that card itself would be super busted in Legacy. The issue is all the stuff that surrounds it, which makes it so that you can defend that card very easily, or it's in the same color as all of the best interaction and card draw and card filtering and so on. Whereas when you get up to the 3 mana mark, you're going to get stuff like Oko, or in any other year, maybe you don't get exactly Oko, but you get these cards with a much higher ceiling. And that arms race where, you know, any 3-drop has to pass the Terminate test or the Vindicate test or whatever you like to call it, and it needs to have some immediate impact and so on and so forth. Then yeah, you're going to get these 3-drops that just do everything under the sun and have good stats. And if you don't answer it, you're going to lose on the spot. It is just really hard to get that with a 1-drop that they could feasibly print, even in a set like this, or a set like one of the Commander products that is explicitly designed to push the envelope there.
Yeah, I do think that from what I've read from some people who have, you know, done the printer method of testing this card, that if you do get it on turn 1, especially on the play, and you start connecting with it, that, you know, Lotus Petal is a very strong card, and the earlier in the game you have it, the more you're kind of breaking the mana system relative to your opponent, and it's probably very difficult to recover from 1 or 2 hits of this thing if you stumble at all on your early curve.
Well, let's say, all right, your opponent plays Ragavan, you play land and pass, they attack you, they get the triggers, and maybe they don't get to do anything immediately with that. So they didn't steal your 2-drop, and now they get to play your 2-drop. So they play something else and they pass. You play a land, you Doomblade their Ragavan, and deliberately choosing a removable spell that's trading down on mana here. So yeah, that exchange is bad for you for sure. And they have a Lotus Petal, and maybe now they get to untap, cast a 4-drop on turn 3 or whatever. It definitely can get out of control. But the fact that it's these Lotus Petals, as you call them, these treasure tokens, that puts a cap on how out of control any of that stuff can get. Like, if you think about why in a lot of Power Max cubes or Vintage cubes, you look at the green section and it's 8 different varieties of Birds of Paradise, Llanowar Elves, Noble Hierarch, Ignoble Hierarch now, and so on. It's because that continuous effect over every spot on your curve is so powerful that's worth the downsides of you draw this late in the game and it doesn't do anything, or you're playing a somewhat fragile card, or you have more risk of flooding, whatever it is. And that's why in some of my designs, I explicitly move towards Gilded Goose instead of these other 1-drops, because Gilded Goose has so much more going for it. You know, that second point of toughness is really big, the food token, and then the ability to have this mana sink that gets you more food tokens over time. Even if there's no synergy that you're leading into with that, that card is just so much more effective at any given point in the game than the other 1-drops are. And yet, you still see people saying, this doesn't cut it for my list. I want the 3rd Finhorn Elves equivalent in there instead, because having that effect spread out over time is just that much more powerful. And this is the same reason why I think Moxen are kind of out of place, even in a vintage cube, where either give everyone a full set of Moxen to the point where you expect that to be a reliable part of both players' starts in every game. And I think that's actually a really interesting design space to look into at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Or just cut that out of it entirely. What you don't want to do is get into the situation where one player has a Mox and now their entire curve is shifted down like one to the left, and they're always playing ahead of schedule. And so with Ragavan, I think it does lead to interesting decisions over how valuable is this resource, how useful is the treasure, and yeah, sometimes this snowballs very quickly out of control, but also sometimes your one drop just blanks the Ragavan. It can't attack into it anymore. And we've mentioned how when so many cards do something when they enter the battlefield, or so many cards just create extra tokens, or there was a period in standard design where every creature had kind of more toughness and power, or all of the relevant ones. So you would have these collected company decks with Sylvan Advocate, Reflector Mage, so on and so forth. And it is so hard for just a one drop that's a 2/1 to thrive in those environments because they get obsoleted so quickly. And I think it's at the point now where you have to do the work to connect with this a lot of the time. And if that's the case, I think this is the right kind of reward to get back for that. So this is the best one drop of all time in that sense. But I think it's still okay. I think even whether you are a lower power cube, higher power cube, I think this is still a fine card. Also, sometimes you play a 2/1 and they play an 0/3 that's also drawing them a card, and you get to you get that satisfaction there as well.
Yeah, so if you're listening, I just scrolled to Hard Evidence, which is a blue 1-mana sorcery that creates an 0/3 crab and investigates. So this draws obvious comparisons to Thraben Inspector. And one of the things I wrote on the forums today is that I think this clue, in theory, should be more effective in a blue shell than a white shell, simply from the dynamic that you can hold up a mana leak or whatever counterspell you want, and if they don't play anything worth countering, you have the clue as kind of the backup mana sink for you to use on their end step.
Yeah, I love this card. It might be the home run of the set for me, in terms of like some cards are more flashy, some cards are more powerful, but this is the card which, whenever I'm designing a new cube now, this and Ravenous Inspector just get locked in, and then the other however many cards fill it out from there. And this, I think, has a lot of upside over Ravenous Inspector in a blue deck, where, as you say, it's easier to play a reactive game with this versus a more conventional, maybe sorcery speed card draw spell. And then the 0/3, as opposed to a 1/2, is a much better defensive body, so that lets you play a more reactive game. Or even in a deck that's trying to be a tempo deck in blue, what we've seen in the past in Limited often is you would have, let's say, a blue-white deck where you have a bunch of flyers and you're trying to race in the air, but your flyers typically have worse stats because flying is such a good ability that you need to sacrifice something to unlock that power. And so let's say I play a Windrake, a 2/2 flyer, they play just random green 3/3 for 3. That green thing is going to beat me in a race. So it's good to have these big defensive bodies even in your kind of tempo skies deck, so that you can clog up the ground and then swing over in the air. And that doesn't translate that well to cube once the power gets to a certain level, but worth keeping in mind. And then you just have all of the nuts and bolts interactions with this card. So this goes to your graveyard right away, so you can delve it. You can flash it back with Snapcaster Mage if you just want an early play to develop your board. Increasingly, blue decks, even if they're not trying, have things that care about instants and sorcery. So you're scrolling over Murktide Regent, for example. This is the Delve Dragon that I actually previewed for SEG, where you delve it and then it gets a +1/+1 counter for each instant or sorcery that you delved in there. And this is a 1 mana sorcery that goes to your graveyard, can be delved away. So it just kind of ties the room together really neatly. And then if you do care about artifacts or tokens or whatever it is, it's kind of hard to not have your deck care about some part of this card in a way that goes beyond just the what it says on the tip.
Yeah. I'll admit to being guilty of not having read your preview yet. But historically, I feel like delve creatures have been some of the strongest ones that they've printed, and certainly with Hogak last year, we can see the power of it. And this certainly, in my opinion, compares favorably to Tombstalker, both by being cheaper and possibly being much bigger on the board. I don't imagine that this will often hit the table as something smaller than a 5/5.
Yeah, I think if you are choosing between this dragon and Ethereal Forager for the same slot in your cube, I think Forager is less likely to just run away with the game. So you don't die to the souped up Tombstalker as often. So it's less polarizing on that axis. And then also it makes you think about, how do I get some good instants or sorceries in the yard to recur with the Forager, as opposed to tossing them into the void with the Regent and just attacking with my big dumb idiot. So I think the Forager is a more interesting card to build around and play with most of the time. But this is a really cool option to have access to as well.
Do you feel like there's any color pie breaking here? I mean, it used to be that if blue would get like an aggressively statted creature, it came with some significant drawbacks. And here we're getting a 6/6 and 8/8 flyer for 2 with an upside. It can grow larger once it's on the table.
I think blue has always been one of the colors that gets to care about graveyards. And I don't know exactly what the color pie philosophy is in the original Future Sight that gave us Tombstalker, where we had this preview, this glimpse into the future. And so is that meant to be the template for what we can expect? Or when we actually got that batch of Delve creatures, 8 years later with Tasigur, Gomag Angler, and so on, you didn't really have blue ones at the time, but I think that was more a function of just the way they split that up in the color pie, where if Delve is the soul time mechanic in your set, then maybe blue gets instants and sorceries with Delve, and black and green get the big Delve creatures. But I don't think this is color pie breaking really at all.
Yeah. I think this delve mechanic is one that, in my experience, kind of scales with the power of your format, and that like the more powerful of a format you have, typically your graveyards tend to fill much quicker, especially if you're running multiple cycles of things like fetch lands. And so I think this could hit the table quite early. I've only played 2 cube games with Hogak, but both times it hit the table on turn 4, one time from the graveyard even. So I think there's certainly plenty of tools, even in a mostly singleton cube, to get these things powered up quickly.
Yeah, I think it does scale well with the speed of your format, where if everyone is taking this flurry of actions on the first few turns, then you could reliably get this out on turn 3, turn 4. If you have a slower format where you can cast normal 4 drops and 5 drops and so on, and the games are a bit more slow paced, at that point you just don't have the material to turbo this out. But then it's more acceptable to wait until turn 6 or whatever to cast this, or maybe even later in the game you cast this and another spell on the same turn. So I think it does what it needs to do to keep up whatever the speed of everything else is.
Now, I have a non-magic story to share with you. And I'm choosing you because I think you are uniquely positioned to appreciate it. I was looking over the shoulder of my wife on her phone. I just kind of glance over at her from time to time. And recently, she's been frequently on Instagram looking at these pictures of this bare chested Adonis type of character. And one of the things about living in a foreign country is that it's changed kind of how I read strings of characters, because now I have the Dutch language in my brain and the kind of typical Belgian Flemish names. And so I saw these pictures wondering, is this someone that she used to date? Is this something I need to be concerned about? I've been in a dad bod transformation since before we even had our child, and I found myself asking, who the fuck is Jan Glim? And I looked it up. It's not Jan Glim, it's Jay Englum.
Oh, God.
Joe Englum from Survivor Worlds Apart and other seasons.
Who has really taken a hard turn over the past few years, where he's very big now he's in like this masculinity cult where you like go through these really arduous things to break your body down in order to prove that you're a proper like knight or whatever. And there's a whole lot of conspiracy theories. I think maybe some anti-vax stuff worked in there too. So a good example of how even those of us who are blessed with good jawlines and abs and so on can still fall down a dangerous rabbit hole for sure.
Yeah, I haven't followed any of that. I looked up Jan Glim on my phone and I found out this, to my knowledge, is not someone my wife has dated.
Anyway, fascinated to hear how this ties into Garth One-Eyed. This is going to be a segue for the ages.
Yes, I imagine this Garth has quite a six-pack beneath him. Actually,
you may not like it, Jason, but this is what peak male performance looks like. It's,
yes.
You kind of have to lean in and squint there, but yeah, you can make up some some abs in there, I'm sure.
I think this card, Garth One-Eye, I'm not even gonna. If you haven't heard of it, it's a 5-color 5-drop that creates a bunch of random ass cards, card tokens, card copies. To me, this card is an illustration of the power of authority, and that wizards can print this card, and because they are a game design production authority, we all get a little excited and tingly. And if you saw this on our custom magic /new, you would rightfully take a dump on it a little bit.
Well, that was my first reaction, in fact, when I saw this card. And I needed to have it explained to me that in terms of the original Magic lore, Garth was actually a very significant character. And if you go back to the book called Magic Arena all the way back in the day, Garth was the protagonist there. And, the point, I think, and doing this from memory, so don't quote me here, but I believe that he shows up to this like wizard tournament and he'd mastered all the magics that the 5 different colors had access to, and takes the whole tournament by
I've seen that anime episode.
Yes, and this is a good recreation of that. And so the reaction that I saw seemed to be split between what the hell is this card, or oh, I have that nostalgia from reading this book 25 years ago and I am madly in love with this thing. And so knowing that, I can take a step back and think, okay, this one isn't for me, but this is targeted at a somewhat niche audience. And for them, this is, everything they've dreamed of for a quarter of a century. So we'll let them have that fun.
Yeah, I do think it captures the imagination. As far as a card that is very much for me, I am very excited about Prismatic Ending, and I feel like this card hasn't gotten as much discussion as it should. To me, this is like a very, very powerful, flexible magic card that gets better the better your format is.
Yeah, it is a strong card. I think if you are coming at it from a place of the decks in my cube typically are two colors more so than three. If there is a third color, that's usually a light splash for something. And you have that concern about the fixing being too good or too easy and these 4-color, 5-color piles coming together, then yeah, that's not a format that's conducive to this card doing well. But if you have doubles of all the fetch lands and every deck has perfect mana and so on, then yeah, this is fantastic.
Yeah, it reminds me of a discussion that I saw about Tempted by the Auric, where this is from Strixhaven. It's a sorcery that lets you steal a creature planeswalker of mana value 3 or less, and the cost is triple blue and a colorless. And what I saw people say is that if the threats in your environment are Oko and Uro, this is quite incredible. And if you power down just like a half step to where the threats are Jace and Siege Rhino, then this loses a lot of its luster. And with Prismatic ending, I see this scaling well towards taking out those Oko Uros, taking out a Jitte if you need, taking out a Delver on turn 1. And then this is never going to answer your opponent's Grave Titan if that's what's winning games in your format.
I will say I am tempted by the Auric. I think that is the best cube card probably from Strixhaven, and this is just a fantastic card. And it's somewhat flippant to say, yeah, if all of your good threats cost 4 mana, then this card gets worse because that's just what the card says. The text is right there. But
yeah,
even in those formats, the tempo swing of I'll take your 2-drop, I'll take your 3-drop is still, and not have any of the counterplay that something like Syrup Temptation has, for example. That's still a very powerful thing to do. And in those slower formats, being able to bridge the gap to your 5s and your 6s and so on is really impactful. I played the Pioneer Cube on Magic Online and did a short write-up about that. And that was actually a lot of fun, but it's what you think of as a lower power format. And Tempted by the Auric was incredible there. Playing for the 3-0, I had a game where I just let my opponent's Liliana, the last hope, tick up to ultimate, and then just yoinked it and had it go off. I think the warning sign in that game, which also speaks to the card's power, was my opponent had a Tireless Tracker that I just didn't do anything about because I didn't care for a while. And then when they saw Tempted by the Auric, your first thought would be, well, I could also steal this fantastic creature that belongs in almost any cube, but I'm saving it for something else. And sure enough, that turned out to be this game-winning Planeswalker ultimate. But it is tough to find a cube that doesn't have good 3-mana, certainly creatures or less to steal, and maybe Planeswalkers not so much, but Grist is in Modern Horizons 2. We have stuff like the 3-mana Duretti, the 2 Lilianas at 3 mana. If you're a boomer and you still like Jace Beleren, then this one's in the mix too. There's just a lot of good stuff to steal, and it's kind of hard to construct a format where this isn't good. And if that's the case, then that is by itself a good like elevator pitch for your format. Is that tells your drafters everything they need to know.
I guess I have a special place in my heart for Jace Beleren because I won my first standard tournament with a playset of him because I didn't have the money for the Mind Sculptors, but the way that the Legend Planeswalker ruling worked back then meant that Beleren would invalidate the Jaces on the other side of the table, and since then they've changed it, so you wouldn't get that dynamic now. But I think the discussion of 3-mana Planeswalkers, I always find these just in terms of like when they hit the board to be so much more dangerous in terms of like if you look at Grist, like it can hit the board and start protecting itself right away, and sometimes this creates a pretty deep hole for your opponent to fight out of.
Yeah, I've really soured in general on planeswalkers that plus to make tokens or plus to protect themselves in some meaningful way, because even though theoretically you can still contain those through combat, it is just so tough to get them off the battlefield. And uh, if you wait for even a turn or two, then all right, great, you've killed the grist, you've redirected damage that could have gone upstairs, so your opponent has functionally gained a bunch of life, and now they still have a ton of stuff left behind. I think they're okay with that trade, most of the time.
Yeah.
Whereas the more specialized planeswalkers, or the ones where they can't defend themselves, so you actually have to spend resources or make tough decisions on, can I afford to chump block this thing that would kill my planeswalker? Do I need to burn this removal spell? That is at least more defensible. Whereas Grist is the template for how that can go wrong.
Are you excited about this card from a cube context?
Oh yeah, absolutely. But it's going to be either it's one of the best cards in your environment, or it isn't, and that's because people are doing ridiculous things like tinkering into God knows what on turn 3, or they're, if this card is not one of the better cards in the format, then you have even bigger problems at that point.
Yeah, I feel like if I'm going to run it, I need to pick up one of the alternate arts, because I find this main art just like very gross, like very.
Yeah, it does the job. I guess
Yeah.
it's good at it, but maybe too good.
Yeah. The other 3-mana walker from the set, I think there's only 2 of them, is Dakan. This is a planeswalker. We're not going to say all of its abilities, so if you're listening, look it up on your phone. I don't have a very big artifact emphasis in my cube, and I feel like a big part of this card is the fact that it can ultimate right away the first turn that you play it. And so I feel like from a kind of design perspective, it's not really a fit for my environment in that sense.
I think it ties into these debates around what signals your cards send, where even if you don't have that many artifacts, I think this card is still pretty good for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
But I think drafters will look at this and think, okay, there are a lot of artifacts here. Maybe there's an artifact something in Esper that I can build around, and then get disappointed where they slam this early and the the mere battlesphere or something that they're hoping for just never comes down because there isn't one in the cube. So why would it? So I think it's a sweet card, but just be mindful of what people are going to read into that.
Yeah, I do think that I've quite liked the play pattern, for example, of Nissa Steward of Elements, where there is a choice about when to deploy it to the table, and sometimes it's best to just play it on 3 and start upping it. Sometimes you hold it until you can get the ultimate on the turn that you play it to kind of like push through some unexpected burst damage for a green-blue deck. And so I think from that perspective, this has some interesting play to it.
That Nissa, I think, is one of the best Planeswalker designs of all time. I think that's
fully agree.
Yeah. I don't know if you can do the same thing again. Maybe it's like a one-trick pony, but just for what it is, I think it's perfect.
It's certainly been the most fun and kind of like rewarding ones to play with, in my opinion. Just like the way that the 2 abilities tie together, the way that it works with top of the library manipulation, and I feel a lot of planeswalkers are more like of a blunt tool in terms of how you use them. You kind of know what you're going to do with it each turn, and then this one requires some more finesse to it that I find really rewarding.
Yeah, and to me, it's so much more fun to play both with and against than like the Gideon ally Zendikars of the world, right? Where you just spam the battlefield, and if they don't answer it, they just die. And you can have interesting decisions, but I think those debates get obscured because what happens is those cards are so good that they crowd out a lot of interesting decisions that could have happened instead. So this came up in Standard where there was a lot of back and forth positioning around Gideon, especially in Gideon mirrors, And okay, that was a fun sub game to solve some of the time,
Mm-hmm.
but any deck that just couldn't answer Gideon, and this was in an era where Planeswalker removal was deliberately minimized. There were so many decks that just never got their day in the sun because they would die to Gideon. And so, if those decks had been present in the ecosystem instead, or as well, those could have led to interesting games too. But these are the ones that never get to exist because of the constraints in the format.
Yeah. Speaking of planeswalkers that protect themselves, the new Grixis planeswalker, 4-mana walker, Gaeadrone Dihada, pretty much from my seat is printed to be like as miserable as possible to play against if you don't have one of those planeswalker removal spells.
Yeah, I do like it insofar as if you have a hero's downfall or something, then what does it accomplish? You have a bunch of stuff with counters on it, but it hasn't made a bunch of tokens. It hasn't drawn you any cards or anything. So I think it's fine from that angle. And I do like that you can immediately swing a game by turning a creature, turning a planeswalker even against its owner. I think threatens are often a great way to add that kind of dynamic quality to a game. So I think I'm warmer on this one than it sounds like you are.
Yeah, I imagine like facing it down as like, I don't know, some other deck where you have two creatures on the board. They corruption your strongest one, and then maybe you can like take this one down to 2 or 3 loyalty, and then they corruption you again, and that you just can't ever kind of like turn the corner on getting this off the board. And I expect that play pattern, when it does work, to be pretty unsatisfying to play against. And I don't expect this to like break constructed or anything. I just think my cube environment is much looser to the point and has much fewer cards that actually say destroy target planeswalker. That when this can't be answered, I think it might be quite I don't know. I don't want to face it. I don't feel like I would get a lot of joy out of using it either.
Mm-hmm.
Going back down the list, a card that I think is brilliant design is Kaleidoscorch. The name, the intersection of the mechanics. So it does X damage to any target, where X is the number of mana spent on it. It's a 2-mana red sorcery with a 5-mana flashback. So potentially on the flashback, you can do 5 damage to anything.
I saw this card and I thought of you. I thought this was if ever there was a card for Eldrazi Domain, then this is it. And just a sweet design on the whole. I think if you push 4-color, 5-color, then the rate on this is pretty good. But otherwise, 2 mana up front. I think there is a big difference between 2 mana and 3 mana. And we mentioned before that cards like Volcanic Hammer or Fire Ambush are just not that inspiring at all. So one thing I have noticed in trying to find like more interesting red burn spells or removal spells is so many of them do only 2 damage. So like Magma Jet, Blast from the Past, Firebolt, some of the sweepers you can play, they're kind of capped at 2, or you have to work a lot harder to go above that. So being aware of how good is 2 mana for 2 damage in my format, that's going to be the big question, more so than anything about the card itself. And that ties in beautifully to Flametongue Yearling, where if you can expect to play this and kill something useful, then this card is fantastic. But if you're facing down a bunch of 3-toughness creatures and you have to jump up to 4, there's a lot of stuff I can do for 4 mana, and a lot of it is more impressive than this. So stuff like that is good to keep in mind.
Are we done with Flametongue Kavu?
I've seen a lot of people saying that. Yeah, it's just the fact that Kavu is conditional in the sense that it needs to have something it can shoot, or else it has to shoot itself. That does hold it back because it means you can't play it out on an empty board after a sweeper. And this has inherited that clause as a true throwback to Flametongue Kavu, which is cool from a flavor standpoint, but does inhibit its gameplay a bit. But yeah, if you're just jamming whatever the new threats are, it is tough to justify Flametongue Kavu in a world of, Chandra Torture Defiance, Hazaret, Pia and Kiran Nalar, Hellrider. There are so many to list that that's the problem, basically, is that you can get stuff that kills a creature much more easily than you can the 4-mana threat that takes over the game, Rekindling Phoenix, so on and so forth, by itself.
Yeah, I guess what I like about this design is that I've found that in Cube, at least, cards that can slot in at different points in your curve are like extremely helpful in just like making sure that you don't fall behind in the early game, because you can probably a big predictor of win percentage in any Magic format. Maybe not all of them, but it's just like how much mana you spend in your first 3-4 turns, and if you can kind of like find a way to sequence more efficiently, that just gives you that added benefit.
By the way, if you're concerned about 1-mana 2/1s of any description being too powerful, this is a good way to clown on cards like that, right? Even if your opponent curves out perfectly, you shoot down one thing and then you can trade for another. That really helps to drag you out to the mid game. And one comparison for Ragavan that isn't quite exact, but like, do you remember when Kythian was spoiled and people just kind of lost their minds, or some of them did, over that card? And certainly at that point, that was the best Savannah Lions Elite Vanguard that we'd ever seen. And I still love that card. I still try and put it in a lot of cubes, but it's a lot harder to run away with the game with that card than it might seem at first glance. And that's just an inherent limitation of bad stats in a more objective sense, in a format where they quickly get outmoded.
I do think that cycle of Flipwalkers is one of my favorite sets of design. I know that we, like, in the Strixhaven review, went on a whole rant about these wordy two-faced cards, and those are certainly, I guess, because you only really have to care about the front side of them, and then to me, I often find myself kind of like rediscovering what the backside of the card is when it flips or when it's about to flip, that it kind of reduces that mental overhead that you have to have when you're thinking about the card, because you can only play it down to the table on one side of them. But I think the only one of that cycle I don't run is probably the red one, and we are talking about red cards. The red Evoke Elemental is now fully released. Fury is a 5-mana double strike 3/3, and when it enters the battlefield, it deals 4 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or planeswalkers. And I don't know why, I really like this card.
Okay.
How do you feel about it?
I think it's an incredible card, and I think this one actually might gain the most from in a cube context as opposed to constructed, for example, where in cube, most of your opponent's decks are going to have creatures of some description. The difference between sorcery and instant for something like Pyrokinesis, for example, is less important there, I think. And then being able to hit Planeswalkers, depending on how stocked your cube is with those, is a really big deal. So also, as the game goes along, you are much happier to just hardcast this one than you are to cast any of the others, basically, I think. Like Solitude is fine and so on, but this one is just, once you get to 5, this is a really, really good Flametongue Kavu, right?
Yeah. Speaking of throwbacks, so we had the Kavu throwback, and now we have Tourach as a legendary creature. Um, I'm not sure what to make of this thing. I mean, random discard is always very strong. Now you get random discard attached to what is, in many cases, a 4/3 creature. Um, is this a card we want in our cubes? Is this something that I know I ran him to Tourach for a long time back when I was really trying to like emulate legacy play patterns in my cube back when I ran a lot of Wasteland and that sort of thing. Lately, I've been kind of cutting back on these cards that are potentially feel bad for the opponent. Maybe too much. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
So with Hinter Torak, the main feel bad I find is they play it on turn 2, you lose your second land, and the game is effectively over on the spot, right? And this card costing 4 mana once you get up to the him effect is a good way to guard against that. I do have a soft spot in my heart for Risefall, which is a real heater, but because it's a gold card, there's much stronger competition for those slots, and it goes in fewer decks and so on. But I think that's a good implementation of the Hinter effect at that price point. But once you get up to 4, I think this is clearly an excellent card. But I think one it's not feel bad in the same way that Hinter is for the most part.
No, but it's still like kind of right away a 3-for-1.
It might feel bad to lose to in the sense that this card is incredibly powerful, but it's not my opponent rolled a d6 and hit the 6 and now the game is over in quite the same way.
Yeah. I find so if you want to cast this, it'll be with the kicker, it'll be triple black and a colorless. I feel like there's a lot more cards, certainly in my cube, that are heavy on black pips than are heavy on any other color pips. And I haven't really thought about it before. I don't know what the repercussions of that are in terms of the design and the drafting dynamics. Certainly, I've seen some people pump out some very capable mono black decks recently. When monocolor, other color decks don't really get played at all in my cube.
I think you can lean into that. You can say, look, many of the good black cards demand a heavy black commitment, which is kind of quite flavorful for black. So whether it's black pips or some of them want specifically swamps or whatever it is, that's the price that you pay. That's the deal with the devil that you make to get some of these bangers in black. And I think that what you don't want to do is I'm going to put the most powerful cards with other constraints in every color. So here are the good white cards, here are the good blue cards, here are the good black cards. And then you accidentally end up in a spot where the good blue cards go in any blue deck or can be splashed in other colors. And so those show up really often. But then the good black cards are all so exclusive to this one mono black deck that's off in its own corner somewhere and never really show up elsewhere. So you can also try and make these more accessible with stuff like the filter lands. So maybe you switch up your mana fixing to the point where you don't have 5-10 card cycles, let's say. You carve out some of the black ones for Twilight Mire, Fetid Heath, Graven Cairns, as opposed to maybe blue-white doesn't want Mystigate as much, for example. So there's stuff you can do to make it accessible. Or I did think the other day of what if Urborg, like the land where we get the green version reskinned in the set, what if you just make Urborg a build-around card in its own right? So you have a lot of double black, even triple black cards. You have cards that care about your swamp count, and at that point, you run into issues where, like, if you don't have the Urborg, then everything gets powered down a bit. But I think there's stuff you can do in that space.
Yeah, I guess my worry there would be on the replay value a little bit, because I I do like the mono black decks when they pop up, but often there's only so little variation you'll get in the mono color deck building within a set. Now you do bring up Urborg, which enables you to go heavy on a color while being multicolor. I guess that leans into some issues of it being likely a one of in your deck, and how do you actually build around it in that sense. But
so one design space that I decided to dive into last night, in fact, was the Jumpstart cube idea, where you have a bunch of these smaller decks, let's say 20 cards, that come in these packages, and then you can mash 2 of those together to make a 40-card deck, 3 of them together to make a 60-card deck, and so you could guarantee you could have like a black devotion or a heavy black deck where you have the Urborg in that deck the whole time, and you have enough black centric fixing, or you go in with the expectation that I'm going to be heavy in black, and then maybe your selection of the other deck by whatever mechanism you have for that takes that into account or forces you to make a choice there. So there's a ton you can do over there as well. And that might honestly, like, this is the literal worst time for me to be having that idea, because we just have the Modern Horizons 2 spoiler. So any task of like renovating my main cube now is getting completely derailed by this Jumpstart cube fantasy. But
so in this idea, the like 20 card half decks are all pre-constructed, and you just all right. I don't know if this makes me a massive hypocrite. Would you call that a cube?
Oh, not this again. It's a cube in the same way that everything is cake, right? Like if you call it a cube, then it's a cube. I wouldn't call it a cube in the same way. This is what really rankled me when, as a young tot, I first made my way onto Salvation, and one of the first threads that I saw was, is this a cube, or is this a curated play experience? Well, that's not a phrase that anyone has ever uttered in their life before, but we need something to contrast a cube with, so that's what we came up with. And I just I don't see the point in those arguments. Like, call it what you want. I'm not going to run anyone off the forums for, oh, this is a space to discuss cube, and you're discussing your curated play experience here, and that's that's terrible manners of you. Like, just talk about it. It's a fun thought experiment to think about. So of all the things we could discuss, why does that need to be the royal we here, not you and me? I'm not calling you out for posing the question, but it's just like any debate like that about terminology just exhausts me at this point. Just don't have time for it.
Speaking of the forums, we at RiptideLab hit a milestone this week of 100,000 lifetime posts, and in celebration, Kerblinks, one of our administrators, scraped all the posts to see, compile a list of the most liked posts of all time, and you, Dom Harvey, came in at number 1 by a country mile.
I will say, in my not defense, I guess offense, that doesn't suggest anything about the quality of my other posts. I might just have like one magnum opus, and then all the rest are just kind of white noise that you have to sift through. Also, I don't know how many of those 100,000 posts are the bots who come in periodically to try and sell us, Viagra, investment opportunities, whatever their newest grift is. But of the posts made by real, authentic humans, it's good to be king, Jason. Nice to be on top.
Yeah, I will say those do not count towards the post count, because if I look at this post currently, it's post 103,000 something. So there have been about 3,000 Viagra ads that we have deleted from our site over the years.
Mm-hmm.
So you are welcome.
What if I needed that Viagra, Jason? And now I just have no idea where to access it.
Yeah. I'm sure someone will drop a link in the YouTube comments to help Dom out.
Whether or not they even knew they were being asked to. Yeah.
Yeah. Moving on to I was trying to make a inappropriate inappropriate comment with timeless or eternal. Okay, it's a white dragon with Eternalize. They have. I mean, Eternal Dragon was not really on my cube radar for a long time. This new dragon looks quite pushed to me.
Yeah, I adore this card, and it's a little odd to see it in Modern Horizons, where I think this card will not really show up in Modern. But this is the only kind of set where you would expect to see something like this. So I'm glad that we get it by whatever means. And Eternal Dragon for me was always one of those litmus tests. It was one of those fan favorites from that mid 2000s era, which has maybe not aged so gracefully, but I always feel sad when I'm cramming the hot new thing in my cube that stuff like Eternal Dragon or Genesis would be another good example. Stuff like that is getting pushed out over time. And to me, that's another good elevator pitch for a cube. If you have to summarize it in one sentence, it's how good is Eternal Dragon in this format? And now we have an Eternal Dragon, which I think can be good in many more formats if you want it to be.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great way to curve out. It kind of curves out into itself, into this Khaleesi zombie dragon thing. And if you do hard cast it, it's a lot of flying power that the opponent has to kind of get off the board if they are trying to remove this threat entirely, in the sense that you can take out their 5/5 and the next turn they're coming back with a 4/4.
Yeah, I think that like so often you cycle your Eternal Dragon, and then it has the theoretical promise that in 8 turns from now you can pick it up, and then the turn after that you can play it again. But how often does that really come up in practice? Whereas with this card, you can use every part of the buffalo more often, and you do have to think, do I want to staple this 2+4 together, or are my other turns spoken for, and I just want to play this as a 5/5 flyer on turn 5, which is, not the best rate by modern standards, but still okay. And so, yeah, I think that this card still gives you choices, but because of how those choices are costed, you get to make them more often. And so I think this is probably a better design on the whole.
Yeah. Now that we've seen this next card, I'm kind of surprised it didn't show up sooner. Ignoble Hierarch. It's Noble Hierarch but Jund, and we all know how that plays, kind of, right?
Yeah, I love having this card. I've seen some pushback on this being just like a carbon copy that's color shifted, and why does this have Exalted when that was the Bant mechanic in that set? And maybe that's just the shards world building not resonating with me very much, but I never saw Exalted as an exclusively Bant mechanic, and we have already seen Exalted come back in M13 with like Knight of Infamy and so on. And that's what you need for this card to be good. That's why Noble Hierarch was so good, as opposed to Avacyn's Welcome and so on. It's not just the fixing, it's the fact that the Exalted comes up so much more than you would think. And in the Jund colors, like let's say you have a red-green aggro deck, I think that deck probably is better placed to make use of that Exalted bonus a lot of the time. You've got some red thing that really wants to attack, like Ragavan, perhaps, for example. And now this makes it a lot easier to connect with that. So, yeah, love this card. Home run for me. And I think I will start building green sections where maybe there are multiple copies of Noble Hierarch, multiple copies of Ignoble Hierarch. And then, if you're mono green, you just play them all at once, and that's fine. If you are Jund, you get this one. If you're Bant, you get the other one. So, love having this option for sure.
Yeah. Next up, we have some artifact stuff. These, to me, I've seen a lot of people on our forums excited about. I feel like Esper Sentinel is one of those cards where I don't get a lot of joy out of playing with it, but playing against it just feels kind of like annoying. Like maybe this is sometimes a fun puzzle to solve, but this is the type of card that doesn't, to me, have too much appeal.
Yeah, this one doesn't get me going. Even the more innocuous artifact creatures in the set, like the Arcbound Mouser or Javelineers or whatever, those stand out to me more than this one does. This is, it may pop up somewhere. I think it's worse at a glance than most people seem to think it is, but that's enough said on it for me.
Yeah. So Ravenous Squirrel, I mentioned in my Eldrazi Domain video as a card that fits the design perfectly there. I am interested to see how it stacks up in my main cube, because normally when I have a sack outlet that I'm looking for, I don't really want a mana cost attached to that activated ability. And certainly this tries to make it worth your while with the card draw, and this can grow with other sack outlets sacking things. And it also crucially doesn't have that cannot block line of text that seemingly every creature in the Aristocrats deck usually comes with.
Yeah, and I think nowadays you are just not going to get new sacrifice outlets that don't have a mana cost associated with it. They understand that that's not a design space they can really operate in. So with that in mind, I think this is the kind of thing you can expect. And I love this for what it is, because so often in the sacrifice decks, you want a certain density of sacrifice outlets, but then those end up competing with each other and have diminishing returns. Where, let's say I have a Carrion Feeder and a Viscera Seer, well, I can only sacrifice a creature to one of those two cards to get the effect. Whereas with this, I can move all in on the Carrion Feeder or all in on the Viscera Seer, and also balloon my Ravenous Squirrel into, gigantic proportions at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Now, there was a discussion on Madness, and the comment that I think Land of Mordor made is that a lot of the Madness cards over the years are so kind of atrocious on their hard cast side, just in terms of like the efficiency you get per mana spent, that it almost feels like a requirement to have the Madness as a way to play it. And certainly, if you build a constructed deck, that's pretty easy to ensure. But from a cube perspective, this doesn't really. A lot of these cards don't pass the like good stuff with hooks qualifier that I'm looking for, and that like they're not very playable without a lot of explicit synergy behind them. And if you have too many of these Madness cards, you start to get I don't know, either cards that are very dead to most drafters, or like only there for one specific deck. It doesn't really give the kind of gluey feeling that I would like from my archetype design.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's that easy and constructed, especially for modern. And that to me is one of the big misses of this set, because whenever you look at a new set, usually there's a 10 different archetypes, one for each color pair. And you understand that's meant to ground the limited format first and foremost, and maybe the signpost uncommon or something can sneak into constructed, or there's a rare in one of those archetypes that ends up being good. But for the most part, you don't expect all of those ahead. What's weird about Madness is they explicitly said, we thought Madness, we wanted that to compete in Modern, and we thought it was a few cards away, and so we wanted to push that in this set. And as far as I can tell, they didn't. Like, we have Asmarano Monica Destina Codica, of course, and the cookbook. But we don't have the cheap enabler that you really need to make that fire on all cylinders. We don't have we have like a 2-mana Putridum, but 1 mana versus 2 is a world of difference in Modern, let me tell you. we have like the Rakdos headliner, the
Mm-hmm.
3/3 haste for 2, which has Echo, discard a card. That's a fantastic card, but it's not the thing which is going to bring me into a madness deck. But because it's almost worse in that role because it's discarding one thing. So if I draw my madness card 2 turns after I pay the Echo on this, then it's useless. And also, this is so good by itself that it just gets them dead before I have time to mess around with any cool madness nonsense. So that is, I think this set is a miss for madness from a competitive standpoint, and certainly looting, being in jail doesn't help that either. But from a cube design perspective too, madness, you end up needing, it's like the reanimator problem. You need the discard outlet, you need the madness cards, and then you need to have all of those in the right mix, and you need all of that to be worth a squeeze, as opposed to just doing a normal game plan. And so if you think about a card like the one we have here, the Terminal Agony. So this is 2 black-red, destroy target creature, and it has madness for black-red. So this is a great removal spell, Terminate plus, if you have a madness outlet, and it's a 4 mana removal spell if you don't. So if your format is slow enough to the point where 4 mana destroy target creature as a sorcery is, maybe you're not happy about it, but you'll play it, then okay, you can start having that discussion. Anything that gets more efficient than that, though, it's so unreliable. You just can't you can't go in on that. And the problem that I mentioned, or that you mentioned with Ravenous Squirrel, where so you need a certain amount of sacrifice outlets in your sacrifice deck, but then they can't all sacrifice the same thing at the same time. That problem is even more extreme with Madness, where just cards in your hand is a finite resource for the most part. And if you dump your whole hand into one Madness thing, then top decking the next Madness thing, it gets so much worse. So you can find tie-ins with like Hellbent and other mechanics and so on. But for the most part, I think Madness as a theme is a big trap. And what you want instead is enough like interlocking graveyard synergies that just discarding cards and then getting them back later is the payoff there. So I think that if you want a medium high power Madness theme in black-red, Croxer is by far the best payoff for that, not anything that actually has the word Madness on it.
Mm-hmm. I just had the thought, because I remember back in the day I played some sort of Madness deck in Pauper, and certainly someone like Kerblinks, who's a Pauper grinder, will see this set through a completely different lens than I do. And I'm wondering if those kind of low population constructed formats like factor into Wizards card design at all? Do you think Pauper is ever on their radar when they're making these cards?
I know that it isn't, and because a lot of people have asked about Chatterstorm from this set. This is the 1 and a green. You make a Squirrel token with Storm, and people are a little concerned about that one because Storm has been broken time and time again in Pauper to the point where you look at the ban list and it's some of the usual suspects and then like 5 or 6 different Storm cards. And so, naturally people are worried about this. And the response basically is, we're going to see how it goes and we will act fast to nix it if it proves to be too good. We don't want to let it rot around. But the thing there is that Pauper is ultimately an artificial format. It's using rarity as its constraint as opposed to release date or anything else. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of hard to design with Pauper in mind outside of like the commander sets or the sets where they are legal in the format. But, for the most part, if you're looking at those sets from a commander standpoint, it's going to be with what's the new legend? What are some of the flashy rares that have some big impact in multiplayer? And you can sneak in some card that's aimed at Pauper in there to good effect. So one example of where this went wrong was the Monarch mechanic, where that gets introduced in Conspiracy, right? Mm-hmm. Conspiracy 2, maybe. And that's intended for games of multiplayer, whether it's in that draft format or in EDH, Commander, excuse me. And you don't think, oh, this is going to wreck Pauper, but that's what it ends up doing. And then in Commander Legends, we get a whole new cycle of Monarch cards, including Fall from Favor. So this is the 2 and a blue. When it enters the battlefield, you become the Monarch, you tap a creature, it doesn't untap while you're the Monarch, and then the Monarch mechanic itself is, if you have the Monarch, you draw a card at the end of each of your turns. And these blue tempo decks were already incredibly strong in Pauper, and these just pushed them way over the line. And so that card got banned pretty much instantly. But that's kind of what you have to do with Pauper, unless you're just not going to print appealing commons and uncommons at all. Or commons, I suppose.
Yeah. It's at the start of that rant, you mentioned EDH, and there was a comment on Reddit that made me literally laugh out loud. And maybe it shouldn't have, but it was discussing Ornithopter of Paradise. It was the top comment on the thread. And it said, well, it is a common. It is sort of like Cold Steel Heart, but it's easy to remove and taps for any color. Also, it can chump block in a pinch and hold equipment. Might see play in EDH. And that to me was just like such a perfect punchline. And the thing that actually like upsets me is that the discussion thread like went and started really like breaking down this comment. And if you go back to that thread, like I did when I went back and tried to screenshot it, the author had to edit it to say, we'll probably see play in EDH. And I had to like edit the HTML to like rewrite his message so that I could reconstruct my screenshot.
I thought where you were going with this is the laziest callback you could possibly have, right? Oh, it's an Ornithopter, and it has for any color of mana. So guess what? It's an Ornithopter of Paradise. And that's a kind of name that when they do the design columns, that's the kind of filler name that they put in there, because we have to call it something internally. And surely the creative team will come up with an actual name for it at some point. And then with so many cards in the set, they just didn't really do that. It's just kind of leaving that one on the table. But this is a rant for another time, maybe. But I kind of feel like EDH has ruined the spoiler discourse during preview season now, and people don't seem to build decks anymore. So whenever you see a new card spoiled, if you go to the top responses, it's always, oh, let's say it's an artifact creature like this one. It's, oh, Urza loves this, or laughs in Emery or something. And it is always identical phrases. There's not even any originality to the language. And you never see these discussions of, oh, this is kind of an interesting tool. How do I build a casual deck around this? Or what's some weird card from back in the day that might, juice this one up? It's always just pattern matching. This is an artifact creature, and I have an EDH deck where the general cares about artifact creatures. So you put 2 and 2 together. There doesn't seem to be any larger thought process going on here. There's none of that. And this is just me going fully like old man yells at clouds deep in the paint here. But like back in the day, it felt like you would see a new card and you weren't quite sure what to do with it. And then that question would lead you down a rabbit hole to find that thing. And now you just know what that thing is, because there's guaranteed to be some commander deck where this goes in the 99, and that's it. There's no more thought required there.
Yeah, but there's other context. Like we shouldn't like judge the entirety of like Magic discourse by filtered Reddit comments.
Well, thank God for that, because but other than the ones that are praising me,
yeah,
it's just just an observation, I suppose.
I thought you would be annoyed by Chef's Kiss, which is like them just kind of tapping in on a modern meme. Because in one of our earlier episodes, you were talking about kind of this style of design that takes you out of the kind of flavor and theming of what you expect Magic to be. And I don't know what this card text has to do with this art or name or anything, but they made the name and you can put it with your Discord emoji, and now we have it.
Yeah, there are a lot of designs in the set where it's just top down based on wordplay or a pun or something. And I don't mind that as long as the card itself is fully functional. And I find the Ornithopter of Paradise concept more offensive from that standpoint, I guess.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, you were just like a big fan of like the most predictable custom card wordplay card ever in Ignoble Hierarch. Like you knew if they were gonna print this effect, what the name of it would be. And does this count as wordplay? I mean,
But okay, so in that case, the word ignoble is just so kind of weird, right? Like that's not a word that's in common parlance.
no.
So it's nice to have that one smuggled in, and also it's a goblin who looks kind of funky instead of a human. So we're mixing that part up. I think that like reskinning of a card is fine, as opposed to, and this is, it's always somewhat arbitrary, these aesthetic preferences, right? But
Mm.
like some of the more explicit top down designs, I know I've ranted about a crow and horse before, but it's like we get it. You're very clever. You've read your Thucydides or God knows what. But it's just, to me, it's, if it's within the same kind of Magic universe, that's fine. But then when it's literally just A plus B, it's, this is an Ornithopter, this is a Birds of Paradise, this is an Ornithopter of Paradise. That, what is meant to be the charm there exactly?
Yeah. I went back and looked at the list of cards that you seem to be excited about that you sent me before our first Modern Horizons 2 podcast. And correct me if I'm wrong, this was on your list, right? Calibrated Blast?
Yeah.
So this is a 3-mana red instant where you reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-land card, and then you deal damage equal to the mana value of this card to any target, and has flashback for 5 mana. And certainly they've had cards that do random damage in this way before, but maybe not to this efficiency. What is it about this card that was drawing you to it?
I think it's good enough at what it does that you can trick yourself into doing that thing now. Like Erratic Explosion was always just so hit or miss. Riddle of Lightning just cost way too much. This is kind of the best parts of both, and it's good enough that you can, let's say in your cube, where if you have a bunch of these top of library effects, a bunch of brainstorms, but you also have some high cost stuff to work towards, whether it's like commit to memory, just you add the 4 to the 6 and you're just blasting them for 10, or I don't know, Greater Gargadon, Emrakul the Promised End. There are a lot of ways to aim high with this almost by accident, and I just love that. And so, yeah, you can't really build a cube around this, and there's not much redundancy on this effect that's good, unless you want to run multiple copies of Calibrated Blast. But just as a unique one-off build around, I think it's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's certainly something you can shove in as like a splash card in your blue-black filled with delve creature deck, um, which are things with like artificially high mana value, even though they're not really that expensive when you actually cast them. Um, yeah, I think there's some more cards, but I don't know. I don't really feel like we need to dissect any more of them. Do you have any kind of like closing thoughts on this set as a whole, either from cube or constructed perspective?
I would say that the same issue I had with Madness also applies to the some of the other themes in the set. So you in blue-black, for example, that's meant to pay you off for discarding cards, which there's a lot of overlap there with Madness, but it's there's like the blue-black 2-drop where when you discard a card, you can pay 1 and amass 2. That's pretty cool. But beyond that, it seems like that theme just didn't show up at all. And likewise, I was so excited to hear that Delirium is coming back and in a new color pair in blue-red. And you can look through the spoiler and not really notice that that's even a thing. Like it shows up on this rare, which is not even a good rare as far as I can tell, for the most part. You've got the uncommon, the channeler, which I think will be very good in legacy maybe, but that's kind of it. But where's the really cool like rare with Delirium, right? In one of these colors or both of them, right? It's just not a theme that has really showed up. And then that carries over to some of the other themes too. Like green-white is meant to be +1/+1 counters. And I love me a Hardened Scales. I was really excited to see what I could pick up from this set. But all the relevant stuff there seems to be in another color pairs mechanic, which is modular. So that's a cool space to explore, but that also has its own requirements to it. So from a cube perspective, and constructed as well, I guess, a lot of the big hits seem to be cards which kind of could be in any other set if you were willing to loosen the boundaries a bit, as opposed to here are the themes of the set, and here are cards that really push that theme to the extreme.
Yeah, I guess I don't know what kind of cards I would be looking for to like really be drawn into Delirium as a mechanic, or that would make me want to build around it, but I don't feel like I've found them in this set.
Someone did upload a thread to the forum just now of Delirium in light of Modern Horizons 2. And frankly, you could have posted that thread at any time in the past few years, just because you really didn't pick anything up from this set, unfortunately.
Yeah. All right. Well, that wraps up our 2-part review of Modern Horizons 2. I think if you want to stay tuned, after the credits, we'll have a little mini rant from Dom from before we went live about, I don't even know what it was about anymore. But you can stick around for that. And as always, or as not always, but as recently, we are on a variety of platforms for you to listen to. We are now on iTunes, we are on Spotify, and from what I've seen, people have started doing that right away. So you are in people's pockets now, Dom.
Beautiful.
All right. Thank you all for listening and have a nice day. Bye. I read your article on Grief on Star City Games. And the Grief Ephemerate turn 1 looks like nothing I ever want to be a part of.
Well, bear in mind, that was day 1 of spoilers, basically, when Grief was the big headliner there, and I managed to snag that before anyone else did. But since then, we've had the whole rest of that cycle. So you have the white member in Solitude, which is such a natural pairing with Ephemerate, and that just devastates any kind of creature deck, basically. And more tools that we get to use with that cycle in the set now. So even scarier than I thought at first glance.
Yeah, I do wonder how constructed will change. I actually don't even know what's like the current top dogs of the meta. I assume that it's some degenerate stuff given by some of the hate cards that I saw printed in this set, but
well, that's a curious thing. So Modern, just before this new set, the top dog was Praris, so blue-red Praris, this kind of spell-based aggressive deck, and then the Heliod combo deck with Spike Feeder, Walking Ballista. That was the top dog just before then, and has kind of been pushed out of the format a little bit. But beneath that, it was some of the usual suspects and nothing too egregious. But since looting left the format, we have not really had any kind of powerful graveyard deck floating around. The one exception is Dredge, which did it looked like that was going to be terrifying again with Thrilling Discovery, where you have like 8 Cathartic Reunions now, but that hasn't really put up the numbers since the first week. But yeah, it's weird. So looking at the set, yeah, you would think that we're living through Hogak Summer again, right? Or we're living through some broken graveyard deck just tearing the format to pieces. And that's really not the case. And because of these hate cards, I don't think it can ever really be the case again.
Yeah, I guess, like, I feel like it's pretty clear that Wizards would at least, like, regret printing some of these Dredge cards in terms of, like, the play mechanics and, like, some of the games that it results in kind of look nothing like Magic to me. And I guess they're just content to... I mean, they've been printing very strong graveyard hate cards for a long time, but I guess back when I paid attention to Modern, they were more like strong sideboard cards, and maybe now they're trying to print some strong main deckable cards.
That's the thing, yeah, because you've always had Lay Down in the Void, Graphica's Cage, Rest in Peace if you're a white deck, and so on. So the issue has never been that the sideboard cards aren't there. The issue is that you get annihilated in game one and then have to win both of the postboard games, and then often those turn into, did I draw my hate card or not? And then if I have my hate card, did they draw their answer to my hate card or not? And that's just not an interesting binary, however you slice it. So what you see, and I think what kicked this off was, if you want to construct some kind of grand unified theory of Magic design over the past few years, is that with Arena becoming one of the, or at this point, the predominant way to play Magic, certainly under COVID, a lot of play on there is done under best of one. And so let's say you're pushing a graveyard theme in a new set, then you need cards which people can put in their main decks without feeling too bad about it, which are going to have some utility in that one game, in that match that they're getting to play. And so stuff like Nine of Autumn, for example, where you see a lot of these naturalized disenchant effects just stapled onto cards that also do a bunch of other things, because you can play that card and it's going to do something against everyone, basically. And maybe it's not incredible, but you're not going to be unhappy to draw it most of the time. Or in terms of more reactive stuff, there's like Return to Nature, I think it is, and then there's the one in this set, which is kind of disenchant, exile a card from a graveyard, and it also has Reinforce. So even if your white aggro deck has no targets for any of those modes, you can still just use this as a combat trick sometimes. So
the Break Ties card.
Yes, yeah, that's it. So I think that is a good shift on the whole. It doesn't really carry over to this set because Modern Horizons only injecting itself into Modern as the youngest format it's legal in means you don't have to worry about that for Arena, for example. But these are safeguards put in place against any future graveyard deck being too ridiculous. And you do have Reanimator in the same set, which may be dead on arrival because of all of these hate cards. But let's say they had left Faithless Looting lying around. If you keep just banning around looting, let's say you ban Golgari Gravetroll and Creeping Chill or whatever, and then, okay, maybe Phoenix has been too good for too long, so you ban Manamorphos, I don't know. Eventually, some new graveyard deck is going to come along where, all right, once again, looting is causing problems. And so either you take the nuclear option and you just ban looting, get it out of the format, or you print these cards where you have these heavy duty responses to the pushed engine pieces in the format. And I think that second camp is probably the better way to go. And yeah, in terms of Dredge, I think if they could go back in time, they would really rein in what they did with that mechanic, where, okay, yeah, you can have Dark Blast, you can have Life from the Loam, you can have these interesting maybe Dredge 2, Dredge 3 kind of cards, but Stinkweed Imp and Golgari Gravetroll can just get right out, because at that point, so often Golgari Gravetroll is a blank piece of cardboard with Dredge 6 on it. And literally, if there was a card that just said Dredge 6, that would be a broken card. That would cause problems in all of the larger formats. And so when you reach that point where you're not even playing the card for the text on the card just because it has this weird zone changing ability, that's when you know that you've messed up somewhere. And so it would not surprise me totally if you wake up one day and those dredge cards have just been deleted from constructed Magic, basically. And I don't think many people, even dredge players themselves, who kind of know what they've been getting themselves into, I don't know if they could really complain all that much. Excuse me.
Yeah, they've been on borrowed time for many years now. But technically, we're not even in the like official podcast yet, so I'll see if I can like work in your rant on modern at the like end of this episode and the editing.
Sure. Well, the funny thing is, the graveyard hate cards that you see in the set are not even fast enough against dredge in vintage, where you need your card to be often like exactly ley line or something that functions on the first turn. And even if you have that, you're going to lose a lot of games to Hollow One and Force of Vigor, so more free spells causing problems. And with this set, the Bazaar of Baghdad decks get juiced up even further, where now you have Master of Death, so that's the blue and black squee that returns itself, and Grief. So now you have this engine where you can just Bazaar every turn to net cards instead of going down cards. And also you have this thing which you can pick it up to pitch to your Grief, your Force of Will, your Force of Negation, your Contagion, all of the pitch spells in your deck. You just get to do that kind of on demand now. So that's kind of terrifying, frankly. But I mean, everything in Vintage is terrifying. And if it isn't, then you're playing the wrong format. So